The warning lights flashed red across the control room as Commander Lisa Murphy watched her worst nightmare come true. The main fusion reactor was dying, and with it, any hope of keeping 847 people alive on the frozen world of Kepler 4 and 42c. "How long do we have?" she asked Engineer Jake Martinez, though she already knew the answer would be bad. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead despite the growing cold. "Backup generators will give us maybe 72 hours of basic life support. After that," he didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what happened to humans when the temperature dropped to minus 180 degrees. Dr. Kevin Ross burst through the control room doors, his breath already starting to fog in the cooling air. "The solar flare damaged more than just the reactor. Our communication array is completely fried. No way to send a distress signal." Lisa felt her heart sink. They were alone on this ice ball, 3 light years from the nearest human settlement. No one would even know they were in trouble until the monthly check-in, which was still 18 days away. By then, New Haven Colony would be nothing but a frozen tomb. The massive solar flare had hit them 6 hours ago. At first, they thought, they had been lucky. The storm shields had held and most of the equipment seemed fine. But then the fusion reactor started throwing error codes and the backup systems began failing one by one. Now the colony's heating systems were shutting down section by section. "We need to move everyone to the central hub," Lisa announced over the intercom. "All non-essential areas are being sealed off. Bring whatever warm clothing and blankets you can find." Dr. Amy Clark was already treating the first cases of frostbite in the medical bay. The elderly colonists and the children were suffering the most. Old Mr. Peterson, who ran the hydroponics lab, couldn't stop shaking even under 3 blankets. Little Emma, only 7 years old, had blue lips despite her mother's desperate attempts to keep her warm. "Commander, we're losing people fast," Amy reported when Lisa checked on the medical situation. "I've got 12 cases of severe hypothermia already. Without proper heating, I can't treat them effectively." Outside the habitat domes, the wind howled with a sound like screaming ghosts. Ice crystals the size of marbles hammered against the reinforced windows. The storm that had followed the solar flare showed no signs of stopping. It was as if the planet itself was trying to kill them. Security Chief Tony Garcia organized teams to salvage anything that could burn. They broke apart wooden furniture, old research papers, even some of the plastic components that wouldn't release toxic fumes. Small fires were started in metal containers throughout the central hub, creating tiny islands of warmth in the growing cold. "This is insane," muttered Dr. Linda Foster, as she fed another stack of research reports into one of the burning barrels. 5 years of geological surveys up in smoke. "Better than freezing to death," Tony replied, but his voice was grim. They all knew the fires wouldn't last long. There simply wasn't enough fuel to keep them going for 3 days. Jake worked frantically in the reactor chamber, his tools becoming harder to grip as the metal grew cold enough to burn bare skin. The fusion containment field had collapsed completely, and the backup power cells were draining faster than expected. Every system he tried to repair seemed to have 3 more problems hiding behind it. "The main power coupling is cracked," he reported to Lisa over his radio. "Even if I could fix it, we'd need replacement parts that are probably frozen solid in storage." Lisa made her way through the colony, checking on different groups of survivors. In the children's area, parents held their little ones close, singing quiet songs to keep them calm. The teenagers huddled together, trying to act brave but unable to hide their fear. In the research section, the scientists continued their work by firelight, as if normal routine could somehow protect them from the cold that was slowly winning the war against their small pockets of heat. As the hours passed, the temperature inside the domes continued to drop. People's breath became visible clouds. Water left in cups began to form ice crystals. The cold crept in through every crack, every seal, every tiny gap in their defenses. Dr. Ross tried to stay busy by calculating their odds of survival. The math was not encouraging. "Even if we burn everything that can safely burn, we might extend our time by 12 hours, maybe 18 if we're lucky." By the second day, the first deaths began. Mrs. Henderson, who taught the colony children, simply went to sleep and never woke up. Her body was found curled up next to one of the dying fires, peaceful but cold as stone. Then Mr. Kim, one of the mining engineers, collapsed while trying to help repair a heating unit. The cold was winning. Lisa gathered the remaining colonists in the main assembly area. There were maybe 400 left who could still move around. The others were too weak from cold exposure or were already showing signs of severe hypothermia. "We're not giving up," she told them, though her own voice was shaking from more than just the cold. "Jake thinks he might be able to jury-rig one of the smaller generators to give us a few more hours of heat. Amy is doing everything she can for the sick. We just need to hold on." But everyone could see the truth in each other's eyes. They were dying slowly, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The strongest among them might last another day, maybe 2. The weaker ones had hours at best. As the third night approached, strange things began to happen. The aurora, lights outside, which had been visible since the solar flare, started to pulse in patterns that seemed almost like signals. The ice formations on the nearby mountains reflected the lights in ways that created dancing shadows across the colonies. "Windows, are you seeing this?" Dr. Foster asked, pointing at her geological sensors. The few instruments still working were showing energy readings that made no sense. Something is generating massive electromagnetic activity out there. But most of the colonists were too cold and too tired to care about mysterious energy readings. They sat around the last few burning barrels, sharing what little warmth remained. Some told stories, others prayed. A few simply stared into the flames, waiting for the end. Lisa made one final check of their supplies. They had maybe 6 hours of fuel left for the fires. The backup generator had finally given up completely. The temperature inside was now only 20 degrees warmer than outside and dropping fast. She was about to return to the main group when Tony grabbed her arm. "Commander, look at this." He pointed to one of the exterior cameras that was still working. Through the swirling snow and ice, a dark shape was moving toward the colony. At first, Lisa thought it might be debris blown by the wind. But as she watched, the shape seemed to be walking upright, moving steadily through the deadly storm as if the cold and wind meant nothing at all. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Nothing could survive out there, not even in a full environmental suit." But the figure kept coming, walking calmly through the frozen hell that was killing them all. The figure moved through the storm like it was nothing more than a gentle breeze. Lisa watched in disbelief as the dark shape walked closer to the colony's outer wall. The wind was howling at over 60 miles per hour, carrying ice sharp enough to cut through metal, yet this person moved in a straight line without even stumbling. "Get Dr. Clark," Lisa told Tony. "And Jake. They need to see this." Within minutes, a small group had gathered around the security monitor. The exterior camera was covered with ice, making the image fuzzy, but they could still make out a human figure approaching the main airlock. "Has to be someone from the colony," Jake said, but his voice was uncertain. "Maybe someone got locked outside during the storm." Dr. Amy Clark shook her head. "Nobody could survive out there for more than 5 minutes. The temperature is -180. Your blood would freeze in your veins." The figure stopped directly in front of the main entrance. Through the static-filled camera feed, they could see it was a man, average height, wearing what looked like ordinary clothes. No environmental suit, no protective gear. Just regular pants and a jacket that should have been frozen solid by now. "This has to be some kind of hallucination," Dr. Ross muttered. "The cold is making us see things." But then the man raised his hand and knocked on the outer airlock door. The sound echoed through the colony's metal walls, loud and clear and completely real. Lisa made a decision that went against every safety rule she knew. "Tony, open the airlock." "Commander, that could let all our remaining heat out," Tony protested. "Look at him," Lisa pointed at the screen. "He's been out there for who knows how long, and he's still moving normally. Either he's already dead and we're all losing our minds, or something impossible is happening. Either way, we need to know." Tony activated the emergency airlock sequence. The outer door opened with a hiss of escaping warm air. The man stepped inside without hesitation. When the outer door sealed and the inner door began to open, everyone in the control room held their breath. The man who walked into their dying colony looked completely ordinary. He appeared to be in his 30s with dark hair and calm eyes. His clothes were dry. There was no ice on his jacket, no frost on his eyebrows. He looked like someone who had just taken a pleasant walk on a spring day. "Hello," he said simply. "I'm Marcus Blake. It looks like you folks are having some trouble." Dr. Clark was the first to find her voice. "How are you alive? The temperature out there would kill anyone in minutes." Marcus smiled, but it was a sad kind of smile. "I don't feel the cold the way you do. Haven't for a long time." He looked around at the small group, taking in their desperate faces and the visible fog of their breathing. "Your reactor failed after the solar flare. You've got maybe 6 hours before the last of your heat sources die out." "How could you possibly know that?" Lisa demanded. "I can sense these things," Marcus said. "When people are dying from the cold, I know. And I come to help if I can." Jake stepped forward, still shivering despite the layers of clothing he wore. "Who are you? Where did you come from? There's no other settlement for light years." "I travel around," Marcus said vaguely. "Between places, looking for people who need help." He walked over to one of the control panels and placed his bare hand on it. The frozen screen flickered and came back to life. Everyone stared. The control panel had been dead for hours, its circuits frozen solid. Yet somehow Marcus's touch had brought it back online. "That's impossible," Dr. Ross whispered. Marcus moved to another panel, then another. Each time he touched the frozen equipment, it began working again. Lights that had been dark for days started glowing. Heating vents that had been silent began to hum with life. "The main power coupling is still broken," Jake said, watching in amazement as his instruments came back online. "These systems shouldn't work without it." "They're working now," Marcus replied simply. He walked over to where several colonists were huddled around one of the last burning barrels. As he approached, the people closest to him stopped shivering. Color returned to their pale faces. Little Emma looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are you warm?" she asked. "I suppose I am," Marcus said, kneeling down to her level. He placed his hand gently on her forehead, and the blue tinge left her lips immediately. Her mother gasped as Emma's breathing became normal for the first time in days. Word spread quickly through the colony. The mysterious stranger who wasn't affected by the cold was somehow bringing their equipment back to life. People began gathering around him, drawn by the warmth that seemed to radiate from his body. Dr. Clark tried to scan Marcus with her medical equipment. The readings made no sense. According to the instruments, his body temperature was both completely normal and completely impossible at the same time. The scanner kept giving error messages as if it couldn't decide what it was looking at. "This doesn't make any sense," she muttered, checking the equipment for malfunctions. "Your machines are working fine," Marcus told her. "They just don't know how to read what I am anymore." "What are you?" Lisa asked directly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, moving through the colony and touching frozen systems. Everywhere he went, heat returned. Water pipes that had been solid ice began flowing again. Air recyclers that had shut down from the cold started working. "I used to be completely human," he finally answered. "That was a long time ago. Now I'm something else. Something more, maybe. Or maybe something different." In the medical bay, Marcus moved among the worst hypothermia cases. People who had been unconscious for hours opened their eyes as he approached. Frostbite that should have required amputation healed before Dr. Clark's amazed eyes. "How is this possible?" she kept asking. "I don't fully understand it myself," Marcus admitted. "But I know that when people are dying from cold, I can help them. It's what I do now." Old Mr. Peterson, who had been barely breathing when Marcus found him, sat up and asked for something to eat. Mrs. Chen, whose fingers had been black with frostbite, flexed her completely normal hands in wonder. As Marcus continued his work through the colony, the temperature began to rise, not just from the equipment he had restored, but from his very presence. The ice on the windows started to melt. The frost in the air began to disappear. "Where do you come from?" Tony asked, following Marcus as he worked. I was exploring some old ruins, Marcus said, placing his hands on a frozen water heater. Found something I probably shouldn't have. It changed me. Now I travel from place to place helping people who are in trouble. What kind of ruins? Dr. Foster asked, her scientist's curiosity overcoming her amazement. Marcus paused in his work. Not human ruins, something older, much older. He looked at her with those calm, strange eyes. Your planet here, it's not as empty as you think it is. Before anyone could ask what he meant by that, alarms began sounding throughout the colony. But these weren't emergency alarms. These were the sensors detecting something impossible. Energy readings were spiking all across the region. The aurora lights outside were growing brighter, pulsing in complex patterns. And deep beneath the ice, something that had been sleeping for a very long time was starting to wake up. Marcus stood very still, listening to sounds that no one else could hear. What's happening? Lisa demanded. My presence here has attracted attention, Marcus said quietly. Things that have been quiet for a long time are stirring. We may have bigger problems than the cold very soon. The ground beneath New Haven Colony began to shake. It started as a gentle trembling, like a distant earthquake, but quickly grew stronger. Equipment that Marcus had just repaired began rattling on the tables. The colonists looked around nervously as the vibrations continued. What's causing this? Lisa asked, checking the seismic monitors that were now working thanks to Marcus. Dr. Linda Foster stared at her geological readings in amazement. The energy is coming from the crystal formations in the mountains. But that's impossible. Those crystals have been dead rock for millions of years. Marcus walked over to the window and looked out toward the distant peaks. The aurora lights were dancing more wildly now, reflecting off the ice in colors that seemed almost alive. They're not dead, he said quietly. They were just sleeping. What do you mean? Dr. Ross demanded. Those are natural crystal formations. We've studied them for 5 years. No, Marcus shook his head. They're not natural. They're technology, very old technology from a race that lived here long before humans ever left Earth. The shaking grew stronger. Outside, the ice began to crack in long lines that stretched toward the mountains. Steam rose from the cracks as if something hot was rising from deep underground. Marcus turned to face the colonists. I need to tell you something about what I am, about what happened to me. He sat down heavily, as if the weight of his story was almost too much to bear. 3 years ago, I was like you. Completely human, I was exploring old ruins on a dead planet at the edge of human space. The ruins were made of the same kind of crystals you have here. I touched one of them, and everything changed. Dr. Clark moved closer, her medical scanner still giving impossible readings when pointed at Marcus. Changed how? The crystal contained a consciousness, Marcus explained. An alien mind that had been stored there for millions of years. When I touched it, that mind merged with mine. Not taking over, but joining with me, sharing space in my head. The colonists exchanged worried glances. This sounded like something from a horror story. The alien race that lived here was dying, Marcus continued. Their star was becoming unstable, just like yours is now. They knew they couldn't survive, so they found a way to preserve their minds in crystal storage. They scattered these crystals across the galaxy, hoping that someday another intelligent species would find them. Jake pointed toward the mountains where the crystals were glowing brighter. So there are alien minds in those crystals? Yes, Marcus nodded. And my presence here is waking them up. The alien consciousness inside me is calling to them, letting them know that intelligent life has returned to this planet. The ground shook again, more violently this time. Through the windows, they could see the crystal formations in the mountains beginning to glow with their own light, not just reflecting the aurora above. Are they dangerous? Tony asked, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Some of them are. The alien race that created these crystals wasn't united when they died. Some of them believed in helping other species survive. Others believed that only the strongest should live, and that weaker races should be removed to make room for the worthy. Dr. Foster's eyes widened. You're saying there are hostile alien minds waking up right now? I'm afraid so, Marcus said. The consciousness that merged with me is one of the peaceful ones. It drives me to save people, to help them survive in impossible situations. But there are others that have different ideas about what should happen to humanity. As if responding to his words, a new sound filled the air. It was like singing, but no human voice could make those notes. The sound seemed to come from the crystals themselves, carried on radio waves that their equipment was picking up. What are they saying? Lisa asked. Marcus closed his eyes and listened. His face grew pale. They're debating. Some want to help you, like the one inside me does, but others are angry. They see humans as invaders on their world. They want to finish what the cold started. The aurora lights suddenly changed color, shifting from green and blue to deep red and purple. The temperature in the colony, which had been rising steadily since Marcus arrived, began to drop again. They're fighting for control, Marcus said, strain showing in his voice. The hostile ones are trying to override the peaceful ones. If they win, they'll turn this entire planet into a frozen wasteland that will kill every human here. Dr. Ross ran to his instruments. The energy patterns are changing. Whatever was warming the colony is being countered by something else. Marcus stood up, and for the first time since his arrival, he looked uncertain. I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight them all. The consciousness inside me is just one voice against many. What can we do to help? Lisa asked immediately. I don't know, Marcus admitted. This has never happened before. Usually I arrive, help people, and leave before the crystals wake up fully. But this planet has more of them than I've ever encountered. They're all connected, all talking to each other. The singing from the crystals grew louder and more complex. It sounded like an argument conducted in a language no human had ever heard. The colonists could feel the sound in their bones vibrating through the floor and walls. Little Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. The singing sounds sad, she said. Like they're scared. Marcus looked at the child with surprise. You can understand. The emotional content? It's not happy singing, Emma said simply. It's crying singing. They're sad and scared and angry all at the same time. Dr. Clark knelt down beside Emma. What else do you hear, sweetheart? Emma listened carefully. Some of them are saying, help the small ones, but other ones are saying, the small ones will hurt us like the others did. Marcus stared at the little girl. Others? What others? But before Emma could answer, the colony's lights began to flicker. The warmth that Marcus had brought was fading fast. Ice began forming on the windows again. They're winning, Marcus said grimly. The hostile consciousness is taking control of the crystal network. They're going to freeze this planet solid. Dr. Foster looked at her geological readings. The crystal formations are drawing power from the planet's core. If they redirect all that energy away from the surface, they could drop the temperature by hundreds of degrees. How long do we have? Lisa asked. Marcus closed his eyes, listening to voices only he could hear. Maybe an hour before the temperature drops below survivable levels. 2 hours before the cold kills everyone. Then we fight, Tony said firmly. We don't just sit here and let alien ghosts kill us. How do you fight minds made of energy? Jake asked. Marcus looked around at the frightened but determined faces of the colonists. I don't know, but the consciousness inside me is telling me something. It says that humans have something these aliens never had. Something that might be stronger than their technology. What's that? Lisa asked. Marcus managed a small smile despite the growing cold. You don't abandon each other. Even when death is certain, you stay together. You share your warmth, your food, your hope. The alien race that created these crystals never learned how to do that. It's why they died alone, storing their minds in rocks instead of finding ways to save each other. The ground shook again, and this time cracks appeared in the colony's walls. The hostile alien consciousness was not just trying to freeze them, it was trying to destroy their shelter entirely. We need to get to the crystal formations, Marcus said suddenly. If I can make direct contact with the network, Maybe I can convince them that humanity is worth saving. That's suicide, Amy protested. Even if you can survive the cold, we can't. Marcus looked at each of them in turn. Then I guess we'll find out what humans are really made of. The decision was made quickly. They had no choice but to follow Marcus toward the crystal formations, even though it meant leaving the safety of the colony. The hostile alien consciousness was already cracking their walls and freezing their air. Staying meant certain death. Everyone who can walk needs to come, Lisa announced. We stick together, no one gets left behind. Dr. Clark worked frantically to prepare the sickest colonists for transport. I can give them stimulants to keep them moving for a few hours, but after that, she didn't finish the sentence. Everyone knew what would happen. Marcus led the group of 400 survivors out into the frozen wasteland. The storm had stopped, but the temperature was dropping fast as the hostile crystals pulled heat away from the planet's surface. The aurora lights overhead had turned blood red, casting everything in an eerie glow. "Stay close to me," Marcus called out. "My body heat should keep the worst of the cold away." It was true. Within 10 feet of Marcus, the air was almost warm. Beyond that circle, the cold was deadly. The colonists huddled together as they walked, forming a tight group around their mysterious protector. Little Emma walked beside Marcus, her small hand in his. "The singing is getting louder," she said. "They're really angry now." "What are they angry about?" Marcus asked. Emma listened to the alien voices that only she seemed to understand clearly. "They're scared we'll hurt them. Someone hurt them before, a long time ago. That's why some of them want to hurt us first." Dr. Foster, struggling to keep up with the group, called out, "Marcus, the energy readings are off the charts. The crystals are drawing power from the planet's core. If they keep this up, they'll freeze the entire surface." The crystal formations in the mountains grew larger as they approached. What had looked like natural rock structures from a distance were clearly artificial up close. Geometric patterns covered their surfaces, and they pulsed with internal light that matched the rhythm of the alien singing. "There," Marcus pointed to the largest crystal spire. "That's the central node. If I can connect with it directly, I might be able to reach the peaceful consciousness that are being overpowered." But as they got closer, the hostile aliens struck back. Ice began forming around the group faster than Marcus could melt it. The temperature plummeted so quickly that people's breath turned to ice crystals before it left their mouths. "We're not going to make it," Jake gasped, his words barely audible through chattering teeth. That's when the colonists did something that surprised even Marcus. Instead of panicking or running, they formed a tighter circle around him. The strongest members moved to the outside, using their bodies to shield the weaker ones from the worst of the cold. "We stay together," Lisa said firmly, even as ice began forming on her eyebrows. "All of us or none of us." Tony and his security team formed the outer ring, their breath creating clouds of steam as they breathed on their hands to keep them warm enough to function. Dr. Clark and the other medical staff stayed in the middle, with the children and elderly, sharing body heat and encouraging everyone to keep moving. The alien consciousness in the crystals seemed confused by this behavior. The singing changed tone, becoming less angry and more uncertain. "They don't understand," Emma said, her young voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "They never helped each other like this. When their world was dying, they all tried to save themselves alone." Marcus felt the alien consciousness inside his head stirring with new strength. The peaceful aliens in the crystal network were gaining power from witnessing something they had never seen before. An entire group of people willing to die for each other rather than save themselves. "Keep going," Marcus urged the group. "You're changing their minds just by being who you are." Step by step, the colonists made their way toward the central crystal. When old Mr. Peterson collapsed from the cold, Jake and Tony immediately picked him up and carried him between them. When Dr. Ross's legs gave out, Amy and Linda supported him on both sides. No one was left behind. The hostile alien voices grew weaker as the peaceful ones grew stronger. The temperature around the group began to rise slightly. Finally, they reached the base of the central crystal spire. It towered above them, taller than the colony's main building, its surface covered with patterns that seemed to shift and change. As they watched, Marcus placed both hands on the crystal surface. Immediately, his body began to glow with the same light as the alien technology. The colonists could hear voices, not through their ears, but directly in their minds. The alien consciousness were speaking to them, trying to understand what they had witnessed. Why had these humans risked their lives for the weak ones? Why hadn't the strong ones saved themselves and left the others to die? Lisa stepped forward and placed her hand on the crystal next to Marcus's. "Because that's not who we are," she said, simply. "We don't leave people behind. We don't let others suffer when we can help." One by one, the other colonists approached the crystal. Jake, Amy, Tony, Dr. Ross, little Emma, they all placed their hands on the alien technology. Each time someone new made contact, the hostile voices grew quieter, and the peaceful ones grew stronger. The alien consciousness that had been prepared to destroy all human life were experiencing something they had never encountered in their millions of years of existence. They were feeling what it meant to belong to a community that truly cared for all its members. "We understand now," the voices said, speaking directly into the minds of every human present. "Your species possesses something we lost long before our world died. You have learned to be strong together instead of strong alone." The crystal spire began to pulse with warm golden light. The temperature around the colonists rose to comfortable levels. In the distance, they could see the lights coming back on in their colony as the heating systems were restored. But more than that, they could feel something changing in the crystals themselves. The alien consciousness were no longer fighting each other. They were working together for the first time in millions of years, united by what they had learned from watching humans refuse to abandon each other. "We will help your species," the voices continued. "Not just here, but wherever you go in the galaxy. You have shown us that survival is not about being the strongest or the smartest. It is about caring for others even when it costs you everything." Marcus stepped back from the crystal, still glowing with alien energy but smiling for the first time since he had arrived. "They're going to create a protection field around your colony. The cold will never threaten you again." "What about you?" Emma asked. "Are you going to stay with us?" Marcus knelt down to her level. "I have to keep traveling. There are other people out there who need help. But now I won't be traveling alone." He gestured toward the crystals. "The peaceful consciousness will be helping me find people in trouble, and they'll be teaching other alien races they encounter about what they learned here." Dr. Foster looked at her instruments in amazement. "The energy field they're creating, it's not just around our colony. It's spreading across the entire planet. They're making this world habitable for human settlement." As the group walked back toward New Haven Colony, the aurora lights overhead had changed once again. Instead of the angry red glow, they now danced in warm gold and silver patterns that seemed almost like a celebration. "Will we see you again?" Lisa asked Marcus as they reached the colony entrance. Marcus looked back toward the mountains where the crystals still glowed with peaceful light. "Maybe someday, but you don't need me anymore. You've got something better than one man with strange abilities. You've got each other." As the colonists settled back into their now warm homes, Marcus walked back out into the night. But this time, he wasn't walking alone. Streams of golden light from the crystals followed him, and they could hear the alien voices singing, not in anger or fear, but in hope. The footprints he left in the snow stayed warm long after he disappeared, into the distance, melting the ice and leaving patches of green grass growing in a world that had been frozen for millions of years.